As of my recording of this video, it's been about 3 days since Silver Surfer and Zabu were nerfed, causing easily the largest metagame shift Marvel Snap has had since it was released in October of last year. While it's definitely too early to know with certainty what the metagame is going to shape up to be, today's video is going to talk about my experience playing on the ladder and what decks seem to look like early standouts, as well as things we can potentially look to do to attack those decks and things other people are trying. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right on into it. As the format's been developing, there are currently 3 decks in my mind that kind of stand out above the rest as the ones that have felt the most powerful that I've played against with some frequency. They are Galactus, Deathwave, and Sauron, Shuri, She-Hulk, Red Skull nonsense. Let's go ahead and look at what sample deck lists look like for each of these and talk about why I think they're great. You'll be able to find links to these deck lists in the video description down below as well if you're looking to easily import them into your own Marvel Snap client. While there's certainly a lot of variation in Galactus decks, I'm not going to profess to know that these 12 cards are 100% optimal. I think there are a couple of key things here to call out as things that seem very strong inside of this archetype. The first big thing is the inclusion of Leech and Dr. Octopus. These cards really felt like they were the missing piece to the puzzle when it came to this deck list being truly busted. Galactus is a card that can be easy to be disrupted with, whether it's, Arrow or Magneto or something like Cosmo catching you the turn that you're looking to play it out, and Leech played on turn 4 off of Electro before you play your Galactus can wipe the text off of all of these cards in your opponent's hand, essentially leaving them helpless the turn we make our powerful play. And similarly, Dr. Octopus, while it's not wiping the text off of your opponent's cards, it's ripping those cards out of their hand the turn before you Galactus, meaning they no longer have them available to them to offer up counterplay. The second note here that is present in all the Galactus decks that seem the most powerful to me is the inclusion of Null and Shang-Chi. Null, collecting points of stats for everything that Galactus blows away, is just a giant mess of numbers that most decks aren't going to be able to overcome, and Shang-Chi is the card that answers anything that might happen to beat the giant mess of numbers that Null can provide. The last thing to note about this archetype, and this is subjective, but I find it very boring to play, and I say that because this deck is very binary in how it functions. The games that you win almost all look in the exact same manner. You play an Accelerant, you disrupt them with Leech or Dr. Octopus, you play your Galactus out and blow away the board, and then you play some combination of Null, Shang-Chi, Chavez, and Death down behind it, and you win the game. You're going to win a lot of 2 and sometimes 4 cube games with this deck, but ultimately you're not going to win a lot of 8 cube games against reasonable players because they're going to understand when they're beat. So it's important that you're snapping the turn before your big play becomes apparent so you can get the most cubes out of your opponent before they're able to bail out of a game that they're certain to be losing. The next archetype that's felt really powerful playing against on the ladder is Shuri, Sauron, She-Hulk. Sauron wipes away all of the effects of your ongoing cards when you play it out, which means the detrimental effects on Ebony Maw, Lizard, Typhoid Married, and Red Skull just go away. Shuri doubles the stats of the next card that we play out, meaning if you play Shuri on 4, you can play a 30 power Red Skull on turn 5, which you can then copy with the Taskmaster plus play an Ebony Maw on turn 6, or you can use Arnim Zola to split that 30 power Taskmaster across the board into the other locations. As a kind of backup plan inside of this deck, we have She-Hulk here as well as Sunspot when we pass on a turn to absorb energy, and She-Hulk also works quite well with Shuri and Taskmaster because if you Shuri on turn 4, pass on turn 5, on your turn 6, you can play a 20 power She-Hulk out doubled up from the Shuri, and then you can Taskmaster copying those 20 points of stats, giving you 40 power on the final turn of the game for an absolutely massive swing. If you're looking to just generate big numbers in a way that your opponent's frequently not going to be able to deal with, this deck is an excellent choice for doing so in a really powerful and consistent manner. To maybe head off some questions at the pass, you definitely can play this Shuri archetype without the Series 5 card Sauron. I think if you cut Sauron, you do need to lose Ebony Maw because that card's much worse if you can't play it after turn 3. So I swap Sauron for Luke Cage because Luke Cage mitigates Typhoid Mary's downside as well as Lizard's downside, and then Titania is another 1 energy play that you can play out on turn 6 alongside a Taskmaster that also works well early with a copy of Zero. You unfortunately cannot not budget Shuri in this deck. It just doesn't operate anywhere near the same power level without her, so you're going to need to pony up 3,000 collector tokens if you're missing her and you want to play this deck to reasonable success. The final archetype that's felt truly busted when playing against it in the current Marvel Snap metagame is Deathwave. For those not familiar, Wave sets the cost of cards in both players' hands to 4 the following turn, and the way this cost setting interacts with cost reduction in Marvel Snap is just truly broken, for lack of a better term. So Death makes herself cheaper for every card that's been destroyed over the course of the game. And how this works with Wave is Death's cost gets set to 4, and then she goes, okay, I cost 4, now make myself cheaper for every card that was destroyed. So what this deck is basically looking to do is, if you've destroyed 2 cards by turn 5, on turn 5, you play out Wave, setting the cost of everything in your hand to 4, and then Death makes herself cost 2 or less, depending on how many things you've blown up, allowing you to play out any cards you want, such as Shang-Chi to deal with the large Red Skull, or Arrow to pull things around the board, as well as a 12 power Death, while your opponent is typically restricted just to making a single play. She-Hulk is another card that interacts with Wave profitably, where she reduces her cost based on how many unspent energy you had the previous turn, which means in a similar manner, if you Wave on turn 5 with 2 unspent energy, your She-Hulk's going to cost 2 the following turn, along with a 4 cost any other card. This also means that an absolute crazy draw that you can generate is if you Wave on 5 with 2 energy up and you blew up 4 things over the course of the game, you could actually Arrow, She-Hulk, and Death all on the final turn, absolutely crushing whatever your opponent is hoping to do. This deck's actually pretty good at picking up 8 cubes, probably the best of these 3 decks at getting 8 cube wins, because in large part it is very swingy on the last turn of the game, and your opponents often are going to think they can get you, and then your big stats plus Arrow or Shang-Chi are going to swing the game right back into your favor. The last thing to note as far as particular deck lists are concerned is that I honestly think most of the Zabu and Surfer decks from previous seasons are still very good after these changes. They've been less popular on the ladder, but that's a phenomenon that happens in most card games in my experience, where they change a card and it's perceived to be worse after the change, and people just stop playing it because of that perception. I've played with both this Moon Zabu Hulk deck as well as this kind of stock Silver Surfer deck after they've been changed, and they're still very good, very reasonable things to be doing, and I'm winning matches with them very consistently. So if you are playing either of these archetypes or other Zabu or Silver Surfer decks from previous seasons, I think they're likely still very good, with the one exception being, obviously, if your Zabu deck was leaning on the double Spider-Man combo, that's no longer accessible with Zabu's change. As far as brewing into these 3 early frontrunners for best deck in the format go, it's kind of tough sledding out there. Arrow is easily the best card in Marvel Snap in our current balance iteration, and she makes playing really large things kind of difficult if you're not also filling your board. And filling your board is kind of difficult when Galactus as well as Killmonger are running around cleaning those boards out or making going wide just not matter. And should you be able to play through all of these and get something really big into play, Shang-Chi is easily the most played tech card right now, in large part due to the prevalence of the Shuri Red Skull deck. I would love to know in the comments down below what you've been finding success with, if it's outside of the deck list that I've featured here today. I think there's other decks that I've had like reasonable runs with inside of smaller samples, but have fallen off in terms of power level compared to the 3 decks I talked about today as I play with them some more. As always, thanks for making it all the way through to the end of the video. Remember, if you enjoyed my musings here today, to snap that like button to help this content reach some more people. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so. I post Marvel Snap tidbits and breakdowns like this, as well as deck highlights 7 days a week. I'd love to see you back again sometime. Happy snapping, folks, and hopefully see you back again real soon.